If I'm marketing to readers, readers are my primary audience, but right behind me are authors, and the authors care how their books are marketed.
Yeah.
So if I can come up with some sort of messaging that's like right book to the right reader at the right time, no one can complain about that. Speaking to multiple groups, I think, has been a common theme in developing messaging.
That's a good example, right book to right reader at the right time, because that hits the what the publisher wants, what the author wants, and what the reader wants. They want the
Right.
right book. They want the one that's going to spark their ideas. The author
Right.
wants their book sold to the right type of reader who's going to recommend it to other people, and the publisher wants to sell a book. Hey everyone, welcome to On Messaging, a show for B2B product marketers on how to create messaging that resonates with your audience. I'm your host, Josh Chronister, and on the show today we have Pete McCarthy, Chief Marketing Officer of Open Road Integrated Media. Before joining Open Road, Pete led consumer insights at Ingram Content Group, co-founded a marketing SaaS, and led marketing at places like Penguin and Random House. Pete's been in marketing at startups, mid-sized companies, large orgs, and as an agency owner. In our conversation, he shares how messaging strategy carries across business sizes, the method behind the right book to the right reader at the right time, how customer relationships drive messaging, the CMO's role on messaging, why product marketers are positioned to be marketing executives, and so much more. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcast app, YouTube, or Substack. It's the best way to get notified of every new episode. All right, let's jump into the conversation. Hey, Pete, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you.
Thank
I
you.
was super excited when you said you're willing to join. We have worked previously in the past, and you are someone that I really look up to when it comes to marketing.
Appreciate it.
So I've had a lot of really good marketing memories with you, but really excited to have you on now. You'll be the first marketing leader, in a CMO position to come on the show. So really excited to hear the insights that
Honored.
you have related to messaging. So
I'm,
thank you.
I'm honored to be on the show. I was thrilled when you asked.
Yes, totally. So I'm somewhat familiar with your background and your journey, but for the audience, I know if you could share your path from your early website creator, book e-commerce consultant, startup co-founder, now CMO. Can you walk us through your path a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I'll try to do it it's 30 years of a path, so I'll make it as concise as possible. But yeah, grew up always loving books. Also grew up with a computer, which I'm not going to disclose my precise age, but if you are my age, that there's a little bit of a rarity to have one. I had one when I was about 7 years old. So I started programming, and for me, programming was like a hobby. It was just, I did it for fun in my spare time, and never thought I'd use it for anything. So that's like a must know. So I arrive, flash forward, I go to college, I study stuff in liberal arts, psychology, which I think does matter. Graduate, I moved to New York City, and I want to be a book editor. That's my goal in life, is to be like the the editor of the most famous authors you could imagine. That's my goal. And this is about 1995 that I moved to the city, and there's something happening at this point, which is the World Wide Web, and I'm aware enough of the fact that this thing's going to be big. Not so prescient to know how big or anything like that, but just it's going to be something major. I actually thought it was going to be video then, but didn't quite understand that 14.4 modems couldn't push thick files at that point. Took a while. And yeah, I was like the only person who could program in my company. And so if you were that, you kind of raised your hand and said, I'll build the website. And so wound up building websites starting 97 or so. Built the New York Review of Books. I built Granta. I built something called the Reader's Catalog, which was licensed by Barnes& and Noble for their first website. So they made their first website. Actually, Amazon had called us about that product.
Nice.
Well, we never heard of them. So the idea of a venture-backed company from Seattle selling books online seemed preposterous to us. We're like, no, 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 the safe bet's BNN, and
Yeah.
we were probably right. It was a safe bet. Was it whether it was the right bet? I don't
Mhm.
know. But so that was really fun. Got me going. And
Mhm.
at that point, didn't think of it as becoming a marketer. It was more like just almost like a technical job crossed with an editor,
Yeah.
content creation. It was kind of everything. You were everything
Mhm.
if you built websites back then. And so from there, I went to Penguin. I always wanted to work. Again, I wanted to be an editor. So going to somewhere like Penguin, this was like a dream come true for me. So I was able to run e-commerce there. I was able to launch their ebooks program, work with Amazon when Amazon was just getting off the ground. Work with Google, Yahoo back when it was Yahoo, big Yahoo.
Yeah.
It was like the big deal. So just a lot of exposure, consistent exposure to all of the developments that were happening with the web, and they were happening fast. This is 98 through like 2005 or so. I'm just experiencing everything and just kind of riding all the different waves
Mhm.
and gradually sort of realizing that this is marketing that I'm doing actually. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of an accidental marketer, if you will. I wanted to be an
That
editor, was
happens a lot.
technical, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden I kind of wind up realizing, hey, wait a minute, I'm running all the email newsletter programs, all the merchandising programs with retailers, and all the advertising programs with all the platforms. Essentially, at this point, I'm a marketer, and
Yeah.
so just kind of embraced that, and then went from Penguin to Random House. So basically, going from one big publisher to another big publisher. Some folks may know they're now the same publisher, which makes them an even bigger publisher. But Random House was a great experience for me. I was able to um, run what they were calling marketing innovation at the time, which was like a almost like a lab internally to try to figure out. I guess we would have referred to it then. It's like 2005 or so. Um, Digital marketing essentially is what we would
Mm.
have called it, but it's all the stuff that we now understand as just like I understand it as just marketing. It
Yeah.
was like there were quants, basically now they'd be data scientists, but same diff. It's
Mhm.
just a different time frame that we're talking about. So they were working on with me. They had developers, web developers, front end developers, lots of use of things like APIs and mashing together of data. Was trying to do attribution modeling for the first time. Like a lot of sort of stuff that we kind of just do as a matter of course now.
Yeah.
This lab, I was able to just play with it and start trying to do it. So that was a great experience. Eventually, I got kind of I have like a sort of 6 year it seems like window on jobs, and then I kind of like want to move. I don't know what it is, but it seems to I want to move into something different. So I went
Yeah.
off and started a consultancy to help smaller publishers. So you know a little bit about publishing, but just
Mhm.
for those who don't, like there's kind of five major publishers, and they're about, and it depends who you ask, but 40 to 60% of the market for consumer books. And then there's 10,000 smaller publishers, and the discrepancy of access to tool sets and just capabilities and just in-house knowledge
Yeah.
is huge. There's no real middle class, so to speak, of publisher. And so the idea of the consultancy was to help the smaller ones kind of be able to level up and understand things on the level of a Random House, say.
Mhm.
Um, we wound up doing a lot of work for those big five because it's inescapable. But we also worked with, we probably worked with nearly 100 different publishers in the consultancy. And that was really rewarding work, really fun. And just lots of different publishers, lots of different goals, and I again learned a ton.
Yeah.
And so mission accomplished. Started a software company because consulting doesn't scale. Um, you know,
Yes.
um, It just doesn't. So a SaaS company, because that was the thing to do at the time, and we had identified, I mean, some patterns in our consultancy, like consistent problems that we could see every publisher having and
Mm-hmm.
stumbling over, and so we came up with a product that you know well. Uh, Marketing Insights is what it wound up being known as, and basically, yeah, that was to scale the consulting so that it didn't all have to be done in person. It
Mm-hmm.
would rather be done as a SaaS product.
What year was that started?
It was 20, well, the idea came. It was one of these things where the idea comes 5 years before you even put pen to paper. At
Yeah.
least in my life, that's how things seem to work. And so 2015, 2016 is about when we start working on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we stood up the first version of the product in like 2016 or so, and then it was acquired
Mm-hmm.
in 2017, late 2017. So like a year later, so it was
It's
quick.
quick.
Yeah,
Very quick.
very quick.
That's when you know when you have a fit and you're really solving a problem is when it's that fast of a turnaround. And I mean, just all of the experience that you just went through of someone might see that, wow, Pete and company started a software company and it got acquired within a year. But you just
Right.
went through like nearly 20 years of experience prior to that
Yeah,
of getting to know the industry, getting to know people within the industry, understanding the problem, seeing the changes. You went from wanting to be an editor to programming to data science to
right,
all of these things.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's like it's a classic overnight success, and it's like
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those funny things too. It's sort of like whenever anyone says like you did this, someone's like, man, you don't understand how many other people were involved in the doing of all of those things. It's like, I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I may have sometimes been a little bit more of a principal actor and a little bit more of a supporting actor, but usually it was a group of people coming up with various things, and
Yeah.
um, luck, happenstance, like right place, right time, wrong place, right time. I mean, whatever it is, and you keep learning, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually, yeah, you have the some overnight successes that I don't know. You kind of you say, well, there we got lucky. It
I
was a
feel
good
like
one.
that's always part of the journey. It's always a little bit of luck and timing and
Absolutely,
things.
absolutely. Yep, yep.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to jump in. I mean, you walked us through your awesome background in history, working from e-commerce to, consultancy, kind of agency side of things, to large B2B corporations where we were working together at Ingram
Yeah,
Content Group, where Marketing Insights was acquired. And now leaning a little bit more on, not so much large B2B corporation, but open road integrated media, a little bit of a smaller company. But you have this diverse background,
right.
and I wanted your perspective on what's the differences, or what differences have you seen in the process of creating positioning and messaging across those different levels of companies.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, I'd flip it. I might flip it and start first with the commonalities. Like one thing that's always struck me is you always have sort of a primary constituency, like the reason for what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like usually some sort of audience, or maybe an internal audience, an external audience, something like that. But then you've always got multiple other constituencies. And your messaging, in my mind, one commonality, common thread amongst all those different sizes of companies, different orientations, B2B, B2C, um, is that you have to have messaging that sort of is universal enough that it speaks to all of the constituents, but where they can hear themselves and their needs within it spoken to directly, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So there's
Yeah.
sort of a universal message, but everybody's needs are being taken care of. So to give you an example, like if I'm marketing to readers,
Mm-hmm.
readers are my primary audience, but right behind me are authors. and the authors care how their books are marketed.
Yeah.
So if I can come up with, some sort of messaging, that's like the right book to the right reader at the right time, no one can complain about that. That's kind of going to satisfy everybody's needs, everybody's desires to a certain extent. I mean, you can't win them all every time, but I
Yeah.
mean, sort of speaking to multiple groups, I think has been a common theme in developing messaging.
That's a good example, right book to right reader at the right time, because that hits the what the publisher wants, what the author wants, and what the reader wants. They want the
Right,
right book. They want the one that's going to spark their ideas. The author
right,
wants their book sold to the right type of reader who's going to recommend it to other people, and the publisher wants to sell a book.
right.
Yeah.
It's sort of it's a so trying to find those, and again, those are just like the overnight successes, right? It's like it rolls off the tongue, but it probably takes 36 meetings to refine it, hone it, get it to the
Absolutely. I
point,
mean,
brainstorming.
we talk a lot about on the show about concise messaging, and that's a perfect example of that, because that message could be so much longer. It could be
Oh
so
yeah,
much longer, but it's what, 6 words, and it
right,
gets the point across. Yep.
right. That's a really good point. Being concise is critical,
Hmm.
I think. And just for me, it's always been not having too many versions of the message, so to speak, or
Yes.
ones that I have to keep in mind. Very helpful. I like something that works, like I say, that has that universality and
Hmm.
speaks to all the stakeholders, so that no matter what kind of interaction I'm stepping into, whether it's at arm's length, like an email marketing campaign to readers, or in an office, with a publisher and an author sitting there, it like I can always basically say the same things, and they're going to resonate.
Yep. Absolutely.
Makes life easier.
Definitely. All right. So you talked about the commonalities. What differences have you seen across the different levels of businesses?
Yeah. A lot of times it's sort of like who are the core customers, and what's their level of understanding.
Hmm.
I think is one difference I've seen. So working for like say large corporations where you're dealing with like when we worked together at Ingram Content Group, we worked with publishers of all sizes,
Yeah.
and so the knowledge level that we could assume of the industry, the trends within the industry, the best practices within the industry, it was wildly it was different amongst, one publisher would have a very different understanding than another.
Yes.
Um,
Remember that.
yeah, so that's a large company thing often,
Hmm.
where you've got just tens of thousands of clients, so you could be dealing with anything when you go into a meeting. At a company like Open Road, a mid-sized company, um, we have on the publisher side 100 plus kind of key clients, which is not a lot, and we know them well.
Yeah.
We know the players, we know their knowledge, we know their levels of understanding, we know the range of understanding. So crafting messaging there is much more straightforward, I would say.
Yeah.
Containable.
Hmm.
You don't find you. I don't find that we miss too often, um, because we know them and it's a smaller set.
Do you feel
Also,
that's because you are in regular conversation with those clients? Like you know what their pain points are, you're having conversations with them all the time, so you kind of speak in their language?
definitely, yeah. Having the time to really do, yeah, conversations, which you can do in a larger company. It's just you don't necessarily know exactly what level of conversation you're going to be having because you're not in regular contact. There's just no way. Laws of physics or time or something dictate that. You just can't. Whereas with 100 and a team, a large enough team, not a huge team, a relatively small team, you can be in regular contact with folks, and really proactively soliciting their input, in a genuine manner. Like we want to hear from them. We want to know what their pain points are, and we mean it. Like, please tell us if you've got any problems. Let us know.
Yeah.
So we want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Regular business reviews, for example, is just that's a matter of course for us.
Yeah.
And you start to see kind of the same faces over and over again. You hear different concerns. You understand how they're doing as a company overall.
Mm-hmm.
What are their priorities specific to the programs that we're providing them, which is basically like ebook sales growth, but also outside of that because these are major companies with lots of different revenue streams. So understanding the more that we can understand about what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish, the more we can fit our offerings into their overall strategy and just help them win in a more holistic way, as opposed to just like our spot solution helping one thing.
Yeah.
So is one better than the other? No, they're just really different. And when I was a consultant, it was all the way toward talking, fully understanding, that was the job. And
White glove service.
yeah, white glove, full. And they're all different, they all have their discrete charms and their drawbacks. But yeah, the positioning and the messaging, consultancy, the positioning and messaging differed insofar as it was much more about the people. So like it was about us as the consultants very much. Like we were a lot of the service was us, right?
Yep.
So we had to really establish our bona fides and why us and not them, the other consultants who were just as qualified on paper. So it's kind of like we all had our I don't know if we were like a band, we had our own little hooks and our own hits and our own things that we like to do, and so that's how we kind of differentiated. But then, you move it into a mid-sized company, it's about the service more than the person. You move it into the large size, it's all about the services and the company.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Oh, this is good. Okay, so smaller size, you've found the differences. It's really leaning on the positioning was really on your personal brand. It seemed
Right.
like,
It was.
yeah, mid-size, you're leaning a little bit more into your services. It's not quite white glove service, but it's still very personal in who
Yeah.
you're working with. You're getting to have those conversations. Those conversations are really influencing your messaging.
Right.
And then large corporations, it's still services and almost the umbrella serving everything that the customer needs. And that's kind of where that messaging can fit in there.
Yes.
Some of the things, sometimes we talk about brand messaging too. And brand obviously can be very big for if you're working at a large corporation. That's in many ways what's going to set you apart from other large corporations, because that
Definitely.
personal touch can be a little hard to get to sometimes.
Absolutely. I'm always so envious of like having worked in performance marketing and like with books where you've got hundreds of thousands of them at any given moment that you're marketing. I'm so jealous of CMOs of like, brand companies like where they just have like a brand, where they flash a logo up there and it just means things to people. I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. It would be so much easier. Each book is different, and each reader is different, and they all take away something different, and each publisher is different, and yeah.
Sometimes
Maybe I
brand
have.
can go really long or really wrong. I mean,
Yep.
I feel like we saw that relatively recently. A lot of people saw it
Yep.
in Jaguar.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah,
everyone probably knows what we're referring to.
that was an aggressive move. I mean,
It was. It was.
was the need to pivot there in the first place? I'm like, well, you pivoted? Like really? Okay. I
I
mean,
know.
maybe who knows?
I have an uncle who owns a couple Jaguars. It's like he loves them. They're like kind
Yeah.
of a collection thing for him.
Yeah.
Like older ones, like 90s
Yep.
Jaguars. They're
Yep.
really awesome.
Yep.
And I saw him over Thanksgiving, and yeah, wasn't too happy about
It wasn't speaking to him.
that. No, he's
Right.
like, I don't know if I'm going to buy another one actually.
Right.
Well,
It's
yeah, it's
always
kind of
so
weird.
interesting, It's one of those things where like I always wonder because when I was working in publishing, right around the advent of the ebook, so sort of the launch of the Kindle, so not the advent of the ebook, but like when it became big and mainstream,
Yeah.
there were a lot of things happening inside of publishers where if you didn't work inside of the publisher, it would have not made sense.
Mm.
But if you did work inside the publisher, it made a lot of sense that we were doing
Yes.
certain things. Um, so I do sometimes, I have this like, there's like 10% of me that wants to allow for the fact that there's something going on inside of Jaguar that has them maybe knowing something about where their brand was heading, who their new customer is, why they weren't getting some of their old customers to keep coming back and they had kind of maybe lost them. So by no means am I saying that what they did is right, but it's possible. It's possible that they're moving on information and data that might make a lot of sense.
Yes, it's very true.
And it could be a really successful pivot. Like who the heck knows? It could work, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, um, I think about Apple products and when the idea was let's strip it down to just four core products when Steve Jobs had that idea, you know, I was remembering the times, when Microsoft had to loan them $100 million just for Apple to stay in business. And now I hear that they're going to reduce the product line at a very time when, the sort of the move of the day was to have more products, not fewer. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking to myself, like, this just seems nuts. And then these things are like, those iMacs that were like, they looked like lollipops, and I was
Yeah.
like, is this
Yeah, we
is
used
this
to
a
have one.
thing? Like, really? Like, I've got like a Dell tower, and like a big, huge monitor, and here comes these little, white things that look like something out of a Pixar, and I thought it was all wrong, but but I was wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm
That's
not
very
saying
true.
Jaguar's right, but they could be.
Time will tell. Time will
Time will
tell.
tell.
They at least have us sitting here speaking about them right now.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah,
that.
yeah. I can say there was absolutely nothing wrong with the old logo.
True.
That leaping jaguar is pretty darn good, but
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right. So you told us a little bit about marketing insights, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about that, about how you created the positioning and messaging for marketing insights that helped it get acquired
right.
in a little over a year. So can you detail that a little bit?
Sure. Um, I would say accidentally is how it was done. But looking back in retrospect, this is kind of what went on. Having had enough experience consulting for these smaller publishers, like I say, some patterns emerged that were consistent pain points for them. Um, like, how do I? I've got a list of books, so a list of books meaning they own the rights to, let's say 500 titles. Common problem. What do I work on? Like which books? Um,
So when
obvious
you
enough.
say, what do I work on for listeners, what do you mean there?
So which book, and then what do I do for it?
Okay.
Just a common problem across the board. So they an easy thing for them to solve for was we have a new book coming out. Okay, that they knew. There's kind of a run book for launching a book, um,
Yeah.
and they could run that play. There is in publishing what we would call a backlist. In music, it would be called the catalog. It's the stuff that's a little older,
Yeah.
and it's actually where most publishers make most of their money. Um, it's not where they spend most of their energy, but it's where they make most of their money, um, which is an entirely different podcast episode. But the common problem was they're all sitting here saying, "Hey, we feel like we're sitting on a gold mine. We have these backlist books, and they sell at this kind of consistent level, and we feel like we could do something about them, but we don't know where to start. You know, should we start with the ones that sell the best? Should we start with the ones that sell the worst and try to improve those because maybe there's more there, or do we start with the ones in the middle? But that never made much sense to me as a guess, but whatever. Um, And we had this answer to it, which was, the place to start is the ones where is the most consumer interest but the titles have received like the least amount of optimization. So there's like a mismatch. People are looking for it. They might want to buy it if they could find it, but they can't find it. And when they do find it, it's a terrible experience. That's where you start. Somehow that message just resonated. Like the first part of the message was basically like, you have a backlist and you don't know where to start. And there's a way to identify where to start.
Yeah.
And this was the age of open APIs. So basically being able to determine where there was consumer interest was actually fairly simple by mashing together a bunch of APIs that would show consumer interest in authors and titles. Basically, think searches, think lands on Wikipedia pages, things like that, where you could sort of determine like this book has a higher, basically a big algorithm that just says this book's going to benefit more from your attention than that book.
Yeah.
And once we established that, the messaging then became, this is essentially like big publisher tech and know-how at an affordable monthly subscription rate.
Nice. Love it. So, and that just comes back to all of your previous experience and ultimately having those conversations. I feel like
Right.
that's the running theme here is if you're consistently having conversations and really getting down to the pain point. You said you identified the pain point of there's backlist titles, and people are interested in those backlist titles, and publishers know that's where they make the most of their money. But how do they know which backlist title to optimize? Because when a reader gets to a book that's maybe 10 years old, and when you say optimize, what does that mean exactly? What are the things that you would optimize in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they would be things like the descriptive copy. Just making sure that it's really clear that it's current, that it reads current, that it doesn't read 2005.
Yeah.
That the words being used make sense, that the way it's contextualized makes sense. If it's nonfiction, that's contextualized, you know, circa 2024 or whenever 2025 now.
Right.
That the hooks are good, that you're not using like outdated, testimonials from publications that died in 2012. Not such a good look, right? So you got to update some of that stuff. Just if you think of an Amazon product page is probably the easiest way for people to envision it. You want that thing to just look pristine,
Yeah.
beautiful quotes, nice imagery, good description, great testimonials. That's basically optimizing.
Yeah.
And then there's stuff around search terms and phrases and things like that. There's a whole Amazon SEO aspect to optimizing as well that we got into so that you rank higher. But that's what it is.
Okay. Awesome. So it's really you're finding those pain points by having those regular conversations with the clients or whoever your ideal customer is.
Yeah.
And being able to clearly articulate and identify like how it's going to be solved, like how that pain point will be solved. And then in this case for book publishers, like it's pretty clear it's going to increase their bottom line. Like,
Right.
that one's pretty clear, especially, in an e-commerce space. That's a pretty good thing to lean on in your messaging. Yeah.
It's a good one. Yeah, I always loved it because it was basically like it was a growth tool that wasn't expensive. So top line goes up, so your software costs flat, and yeah, you grow without adding a lot of costs. It's a good thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I'm pretty familiar with that product. I thought it was great. It was a fun fun software tool to work on. You and the team did an awesome job creating it,
And you
and it
did
was
a good
awesome
job
being in it.
positioning it. I mean, it was good. It
It
was a
was
tough.
good. It was
I
good. It
think
was
the
fun.
trick there. I'd have a question for you. I think one of the tricks there was because so much of it came out of the consulting
Mhm.
and into the product. There was a challenge. I felt a challenge, which was how much to lean into the old um, consulting sort of personal brand based stuff
Hmm.
versus how much to kind of go with the sort of like, okay, put it inside of a large company and allow it to take sort of the large company brand stuff. It was a hard balance. Did you find that hard?
Yeah, I definitely found that to be a hard balance, especially when you have like a large business that has umbrella companies
Yeah.
or umbrella brands underneath of it,
Yeah.
or the opposite way around, an umbrella company with
Right.
smaller, services and products underneath,
Yeah.
and and often they can be sold to different types of personas within a business. So,
That's right.
at Ingram and within the publishing industry, uh, there were there are many different job titles and different positions in publishing or companies,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
same with other like just B2B organizations. It's the buying committee is different.
Yes.
So when you have a large umbrella company that maybe is historically selling into only one of those personas, and then you bring in a new product or service that was either started within the company or it was acquired, and
Yeah.
it's selling into a different persona now,
Yeah.
that can be difficult because you're essentially starting a new audience. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and then if you have a good relationship with, an established customer, and they're willing to help introduce you to those other business lines within the organization, that definitely helps a lot.
Yeah.
But that's challenging. That takes its own unique messaging of expanding the a product portfolio inside
Right.
of an existing business.
Yeah.
But for marketing insights and what we were working on, I felt it was a good mix of large corporate organization, but still focusing on relationships. One of the things I
Right.
remember us doing was something called office hours, where we would set up time on Fridays and short 30 minutes and be willing to take almost like consultation
Yep.
calls.
Yep.
So I know yourself and one of our other good friends and colleagues, Jess, would open up their calendar to
Yep.
have these conversations. So that added to it. And then on a larger scale, we ran a lot of webinars, and
Yeah.
those webinars were quite successful,
Yeah.
because a lot of it was very educational. We allowed for questions to be asked, and we had familiar faces on there as well. So it was almost like we were building a little bit of a community.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you said, is when you're working for a large corporate organization, a lot of times the customer base can range from very small to very large when you're able to serve all aspects of the market.
Totally. Yeah.
From publishers that are 10 to publishers, 10 employees to publishers that are 500.
Right.
The knowledge base, I remember that the knowledge base ranged
Yeah.
drastically. So, you'd say some acronyms or some words. Not everyone would be following along
Very
at the
true.
same
Very hard to
pace.
land the messaging in a place that they're all going to understand it and feel comfortable with it.
Definitely,
Yeah. Um,
definitely.
but it was a good mix. It was a good challenge too. And I don't think it was. I think software companies, especially ones that roll up a lot of products underneath kind of that umbrella brand idea, the Adobes, the Salesforces of the world,
Mm-hmm.
um, face this challenge. I've spoken to some uh, founders who have been acquired by those kind of places, and same challenges. That when they do the startup thing, it's kind of all about them and their direct relationships with their customers, and they really get the chance to listen a lot and hear a lot and form the product roadmap based on like pain points that people are really having with the product as well as the business, and just a rich understanding. And then they get acquired and they feel, I'm not saying I felt this way, but at the big like Salesforce level, they feel like I don't even know who the client is. They're like, I've never heard of that company before, and they're like, oh, they're like a $20 billion a year top line like tire manufacturer, and they're like, I don't want to. Okay, I don't know them. Can I meet with them? It's like, oh, you don't need to.
It's an
They're
interesting
buying.
shift. It's an
Yeah,
interesting shift of it's almost like going away. You see that a lot. You go away from your bread and butter of what got you to where you are and to growth and acquisition. And then once you lean off of those relationships, a lot of times you'll see the growth slow
yeah,
a little bit. There's obviously many other factors, market factors and things like
right.
that, and demand for the product or service. But
It's an interesting dynamic to watch.
it
You
is,
know.
yeah. I love this. All right, so I wanted to switch gears here, and we can jump a little bit more into you as the chief marketing officer of Open Road Integrated Media. So, and I want to look at things from that lens
Hmm.
now, and get an understanding of what your role is in the creation of messaging in this
Sure.
current state of your career.
Yeah, sure. Um, so a good way to just have a concept of open road in your mind is we're sort of sitting in the middle here. We've got a bunch of readers. We have a sort of a first party audience of readers. These are power readers. These are people who read 25 plus books a year. Um, it's a good audience. We love them.
Yeah.
Uh, we reach them, communicate with them via email, via web, um, other channels as well, social. But those are our big primary ways of reaching them. So that's one constituency. Um, just hang on to that for a second. Sort of on this side, we've got publishers, and we work with, like I said, 100 plus publishers, and our value proposition to them is that we basically increase their ebook sales dramatically. And one of the ways we do that is by marketing their ebooks to that audience, that first party audience, as well as a number of other things, but that's one of the big ones. So I'd say two core areas of messaging that I'm responsible for. Ultimately, it's not as if I go about crafting all of this by hand, but would be the messaging out to the readers, the positioning, um, and that would be of properties. So that could be websites, those could be email newsletters they're signing up for, email programs, but also literally down to the title level, and groups of titles, sets of titles. How are we messaging books for young adult readers? Like, what are we calling them? How are we referring to them? Are we marketing them to actual young adults? Or are we marketing them more to like people 20 to say 27 who kind of like read young adult books, but wouldn't identify as a young adult themselves? They would identify as like I'm an adult, man. Uh, so we got to figure all that out, right? So the specific and I always think of it as like, what are the hooks? For me, messaging is like, what's the hook? So in the positioning. So for readers, it's like, what's the hook? Why do I care? What, as a reader, why do they care? So involved with that, and that goes right up down to like subject lines of individual emails and things like
Okay.
that. So like really looking at like, let's take a look at the subject lines of everything that we send. But when it's personalized, how do we differentiate it from when it's kind of a more general send? What do the engagement levels look like when we do things in certain ways and versus other ways? Using all the different levers, sense of urgency, FOMO. All marketers know all the tricks. But then there's also, just as importantly, the messaging back to our publishing partners about how we're marketing their books. And the answer to that is sort of like frequently, um, intelligently. Uh, you know, I wouldn't even call it frequently. I would call it persistently. And we message that back. We do some novel things. I mean, we've got, for example, sort of automated feeds of all the marketing activity around their books that goes back to our partners so that they can see kind of what's happening with their books.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons for that is that they have stakeholders with the authors. So they need to know what's going on with these books. Um, Agents as well. So they may get a call like, hey, I just saw that this book popped. It's like number 2 in this Amazon category. Like, what happened? Well, we've provided them with information so they can answer that question. We can answer that question. Everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
So there's that messaging as well. And then there's kind of like, I would call it like industry messaging, which is kind of like, just to the industry at large, who are we, what do we do, and how do we fit in there. So it's kind of all the main messaging arenas as I think of them.
Yeah. How, from that main messaging arena perspective, how involved are you in the creation of that? Are there others on your team that are helping create that, from kind of like that manual, actually drafting it and creating it, and you're reviewing it? Or what does that look like for you and the team?
Definitely. They'd probably give a different answer, right? I like to think of it as they're doing most of it, and this is true. I'm kidding. It's I've got an audience development and engagement person who's just terrific, and it's her responsibility to like work with her team to come up with innovative subject lines, A/B tests, personalization tests. Mm-hmm. I may be in the meeting when some of these things are being discussed, but I'm certainly not like line managing the subjects. Like it's kind of like try stuff, and then I'm going to hear from her in a one-on-one, kind of what may be working, really well, what maybe we don't know enough about yet, or what just hasn't worked yet at all. And we had some hypotheses. And in one-on-ones, I may have a few of my own ideas, but they tend to be more generic and sort of structural. Like, what if we tried, I don't know, deeply personalized subject lines?
Mm. Yeah.
So my ideas are more just kind of general, and then on the back to publisher's side, I play more of a supporting role there. I would say there's a lot of narrative involved in this, depending on kind of what the publisher's kind of overall strategies are. Like you need to. I find anyway. I need to match how we talk about their business with us to their business just in general. And so I get very involved in sort of, let's say, a business review, trying to make sure that we're discussing the things that they want to hear. We have a business development manager who makes sure that we're talking about the financial performance and things that they want to hear. And she knows a ton about, their business, needs and their goals and their aims. But then the kind of construction of that, which a lot of people wouldn't think of as marketing, but to me, a PowerPoint that's presented in a meeting is a marketing vehicle, and it's a messaging vehicle, and it's a narrative vehicle, and matching the narrative to what you've heard over time from them, so that they're getting their questions answered, is key. So I'm heavily involved in that. Although at the size company we are, it's wonderful because our CEO is involved in these things as well. I mean, our CFO gets involved, head of biz dev. So lots of folks are involved in it. And a lot of times I'm playing devil's advocate. Sometimes I'm throwing ideas out there, but they're general. Sometimes I'm always reviewing results, though. That's the commonality. Like I'm always looking at how to go and trying to keep the good stuff and throw away the bad stuff. Always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's that was one of the questions I had for you. Let's dive into that a little bit. As a marketing leader, what what data are you looking for to help quantify the success? And you can go across just marketing data as well if you want to dive into maybe some of the messaging and positioning.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, think of the two constituents, right? So you get your readers on the one side and the publishers on the other side. With the readers, it's all typical stuff. I mean, it's sort of like engagement levels, it's click through rates, it's churn rate. Mercifully, we don't have much,
Mm-hmm.
but those kinds of things. It's yeah, there's attribution modeling, which we use directionally. It's not the be all end all, but it does
Yeah.
tell us. It's almost like a wind gauge on top of a barn. It tells us which way the wind's blowing anyway, to a certain degree. Um, uh, so I'm looking at a lot of that stuff. I'm very enamored of kind of marrying up multiple data points together to try to get to a larger story of what's really going on,
Mm.
so that I don't get stuck in one part, let's say, of the funnel.
Yeah.
Like, so I always want to understand, like, we did this happened, and then all these sort of KPIs in the middle happened. Um, and I think one of the mistakes that I've made in the past is I've assumed a causality, like between this KPI to this KPI to this KPI to this KPI is, there's ultimately going to be kind of equal causality every time I do something. So that if the first KPI is, at this level, that last one is going to be at a predictable level. And unfortunately, the world's just a little weirder than that. And there's a lot of nuance in there. But I find the more data points that I can pull in, kind of the more pattern spotting we can do, and we can start to see things. And then we sort of head in the machine learning direction to say, wait a minute, we're seeing these patterns. What patterns might we be able to form a hypothesis about, and then to prove or disprove that it's going to be more or less effective more often than not.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of data points, and some of them are obvious, and some of them are far less obvious. I think is my hope.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like to look. I like looking for those less obvious ones. Um,
There's a data science background coming in.
right, right, right.
That was it was what you were just walking through. It feels like a more scientific approach than a lot of us product marketers typically take, and what you're just talking about of causation. And I remember you talking about this a lot previously as well, is looking at the difference and trying to understand the difference between causation and correlation in
Yeah.
data. uh,
We
do you have anything you could add on how to come up with like understanding the difference between causation and correlation, especially when it comes to marketing related data?
right. Could go down the stats route, but that's the rabbit hole to end all rabbit holes, But there are we have data scientists who understand statistics far better than me, who can actually run analyses to figure out whether relationships between thing A happening and result B occurring as sort of occurring, whether that relationship is a causal relationship or a correlated relationship, just by using large data sets and trying to figure out if one happens, does the other one tend to happen more often than not, and is it significant in terms of its occurrence. For me, yeah, not confusing the two is like really important. So I try to do things where I can um, isolate changes, so that we're usually working with one thing, and not multiple things at the same time in terms of what we're testing,
Mm.
so that we can be kind of clean with it, trying not to. And then I'd say the other thing is throwing out all of the things that would probably leads you down the wrong road to believe that, oh, I did this, therefore that happened. Like anytime I hear that, I'm like immediately suspicious because um, I don't know. And I hear it on the radio every morning. It's like stock market rose because of. And I'm like, maybe because of that, but maybe because of 47,000 other things that might have happened also.
Yeah.
Uh, Sometimes, like a Fed change in the rate. Okay, I'll buy some causality there.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm like, yeah, it could have been because it was cold and people didn't go in. I don't know. The So we just try to watch it, keep it isolated, and then lean on our data scientists to tell us, is what we're seeing as a pattern causal or not. Sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes you need the data scientists to jump in and say, no, that's just correlated.
Yeah, they're much smarter when it comes to the data than us marketers.
Right.
They're good people to lean on.
And I think the reason we pay so much attention to it, I think, is that B2C component is big. It's like many to many.
Yeah.
It's our catalog is 70,000 plus titles that we're marketing to millions of readers. So understanding it is so important. We changed a price by $3. Okay, and sales went up. Okay, how many titles did you do it on? 4,000. Okay, so what happened to all 4,000 of those titles over a span of time? Leveling for seasonality, because people buy books at different times, and they buy ebooks at different times than regular books. Backing out a lot of things so that you can really get it like, yeah, you know what it was? It was the price change. Or, might have played a role, but unclear that it was that onto its own, So those kinds of things matter when you're doing it at the scale many to many. Whereas on the publisher side, my KPIs are a lot simpler. It's kind of like they're also a little squishier. So they're simpler, but they're squishier. So have their revenues gone up because that's the main reason for participating with us, and grateful that that's usually the case. So don't have to have those difficult conversations too often. But like this is where psychology might enter the frame a little bit, right? Is kind of like making money is the core, at the core of most of these companies, because they're companies. It's at the core of what they do, right?
Yeah.
But on the individual decision maker level, like their company making money is important, but there's going to be other agenda items that are in the mind and the ears that are listening to us talk, right? And those agenda items are important, and they may have to do with, internal changes they may have that are coming, or that they may think are coming, or they may have to do with global market changes that are happening that they're going to need to respond to, that we haven't even discussed yet, but they're top of mind for them. You think, oh, they want to grow their sales. Everybody wants to grow their sales. Maybe that year they actually are trying to reduce their costs. So that's a different vibe. It's a different kind of conversation. So look for satisfaction. I talk a lot about satisfaction when it comes to publishers. Like, are they basically, like, what's the vibe? Do they feel good about the service? So number one is it providing the financial return that they were hoping for? That's got to be a checkbox. But then the next part is like, is it proving satisfying? Because if all you're doing is like writing people checks and never calling them, I don't know. It's like, having a friend help you move and give them a pizza and then close the door. It's like, thanks, bro. Like, it's not a good look. Invite the guy in.
Yeah. See you later.
Yeah. See you later. Thanks. So it's not just about the ROI. There's got to be more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's come up a couple times in conversations we've had on the show of, getting an idea of when messaging and your marketing is resonating is when you get those virtual head nods.
Right.
You're seeing, obviously there's that financial aspect of, is the revenue for the business growing? Are you solving the customer's problem? But when you're in relationship and having those conversations too, or your sales team is having those conversations, being able to see either that prospect or the customer, like, yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that makes sense.
That's when your messaging and what you're doing is really hitting.
Yep.
It's awesome. It's
Yep.
awesome. Um, there's a couple closeout questions I wanted us to get to,
Yeah, man.
and there's one specifically. Since you're in a marketing leadership role, wanted to get your advice, or what advice you would have for product marketers who are looking to grow into an executive role one day.
Right. First of all, I think being a product marketer is a terrific place to be to ultimately become an executive now. So, 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure it would have been seen the same way, but I think now it definitely would be, at least by someone like me, or me, specifically me, in this case. But, and I'll give you the reasons. Being close to product, whether you're management, whether you're product marketing, um, is basically going to expose you to, if you're paying attention, um, the business, the overall business. You're going to understand what problems you're trying to solve, how you're going about solving them. You're going to understand where your own pain points are. Like, geez, it's too expensive to create our product, so we have to charge more, or we have to skimp on features, or whatever it may be. And then as a product marketer, it's kind of like you're seeing all of that, and you're doing the other piece, which is, so you're understanding the product side from product development side,
Mm-hmm.
but then also how it plays in the marketplace, which is essentially like, call it sales, call it business development, call it account relationships, call it lead gen. I don't care. I mean, for me, it's all the same thing. It just depends on how your company goes about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a lot of, I'll switch back to the industry I know best, publishing. A lot of publishing CEOs came out of sales departments. And sales departments back 20 years ago were the folks responsible for servicing Costco, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, the accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the accounts were the closest people to the readers. And so at the end of the day, sales were close to the books, the authors, the booksellers, and the readers.
Mm.
Basically the perfect position to be in to ultimately wind up in an executive role, because you kind of understand the entire business, as opposed to working in, let's say, like logistics or operations or something, where you understand parts, but you kind of not the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think product is that now, and marketing is sort of the voice of the product, and to me that's like the new sales,
Mm.
and it gives you that overarching vision. So I would, if I had a suggestion for people, I would just say, like, conceive of it that way, and understand that your understanding of the business all the way through to the customer is probably the best within the company, or the most complete. Let's put it that way, the most complete, which gives you a chance to learn a ton, observe a ton, identify a ton, and also just going into other roles bring that exact same kind of, like, I need to understand this holistically, or I'm not going to be able to do my job kind of thinking.
Yeah.
Just bring that into the role. And I think anyone who brings that into a role, that I need to understand this holistically in order to do my job, is kind of heading toward, whether they actually wind up being an executive is up to them, and up to fate and forces and all sorts of things that I don't know anything about. But like, that's the right way, I think, to be thinking of things, and less about like I'm doing this job really well, and more like I'm understanding the whole if I'm understanding the whole, then I'm heading toward being able
Yeah.
to add value at a more macro strategic level.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. That's great perspective. Love it. There's some people in product marketing I know who do not view product marketers as marketers. That's kind of a
Uh,
one of the podcasts that popped up recently, and um, it's a legitimate take of thinking
yeah,
of product marketers from a more strategy role or chief, going up into a role of chief strategy officer because they're seeing, like you said, the product side of things, the pain points, how it's being built, what does it cost, even leaning into the engineering of it,
hmm
and then through to the market and understanding the market conditions, and then down into the sales side of things and understanding the customers. So
yeah.
kind of touches on all forces that are needed to really be a successful business for sure. So
It's a really it's interesting that that's come up because I would agree. I would agree or at least endorse that having that conversation because like to me, yeah, marketing is a part of being a product marketer, but it's like it's only a part, and
mm-hmm.
messaging is only a part,
Yep.
and yeah, it's a much more big picture role than marketing would indicate.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Awesome.
agreed.
So, to kind of end us here, what is one piece of messaging advice that you would give to listeners that they can maybe take and implement tomorrow?
Oh, yeah, this is a fun one. All right, so I was taught this by a mentor that I had, and it's a thing. I don't know where it comes from. Probably a business school. I would assume. I didn't go to business school, so I'm just going to assume it comes from business school, and I stole it basically. I stole the idea, um, and it's based on the premise of assume that you don't always know like what the right message is going to be, um, and but that if you get a bunch of people in a room, oftentimes they can help you to get closer to what the right message might be. So here it works like this: you grab 5, 6 colleagues, and you don't tell them what you're going to talk about. You just say, "I need you for 10 minutes." It's a 10-minute exercise, um, and you sit down and as the sort of like leader of the little group. You don't establish yourself as a leader. You just sit in a circle, or if you're on Zoom, you just
Yep.
gallery or put yourself in those little like theater seats, and you basically say, okay, here's my challenge, and what I'm going to state my challenge, and what I want is rapid fire around the room what you all would come up with as like your best effort. No wrong answers, and if you can't come up with anything in 1 second, pass. So it's almost like a quiz show game, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I need a marketing message for like my sweater company. I'm gonna be doing just blue sweaters. That's my marketing company. Sorry, that's my company. All blues, all shades of blue. So I need a good concise message. I'm not gonna tell you what I have already thought of. And this group should be comprised, by the way, not just of marketers. It would be people from finance, people who are going to laugh and be like, I don't have any business doing this. Because what they're going to say is going to often not be right on the nose, but they're going to use some word or something that's going to have you go, wait a minute, that's interesting. Like they leaned into this aspect of like blue that I wasn't thinking about at all. Like they were thinking about it as like cool blue or something like that, or like aqua. Somebody says like water, and you're like weird. Oh, like but maybe there is something in water, and maybe I want to use like the word thesaurus tool, which I love, just to kind of play with this term a little bit. So you go around the room like 3 times, you get a bunch of ideas, you write them all down, and then you kind of go back and what you do is you bounce them off of your own ideas, and sort of ultimately wind up with kind of like one that feels right or two that feels right. And then I usually like a devil's advocate, so kind of go to somebody and say like, here's a message that I'm considering. Throw rocks at it. Tell me why it's dumb. Tell me why it doesn't work. And then, once it kind of passes those two, I don't always do the first one. I always do the second one. Like, always say throw rocks at it,
Yeah.
because I don't know. So when my father worked for General Electric, he was doing some work in Japan, and they had, GE used to have the "We bring good things to life" was their tagline,
Yeah.
which my understanding is in Japan meant we raise the dead, which was not what they were. That, not the message they were going for. And if they had just had someone play devil's advocate with them for a second and say, you know what, this isn't gonna play the way you think.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
so I
I
like the devil's advocate, but I love the team consult. That's what that was called, and it's basically just throw out your challenge and let people come up with messages, and they'll surprise you or lead you toward or away from ideas that you had before when you hear them.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. I love that piece of advice. Um,
And it's
it's
fun.
it is fun. Yeah, something different than you wouldn't typically do or think of. And you probably get some pretty interesting answers, like you said.
You do. And sometimes some ones that are just completely on the money. Like people, it's amazing, like someone from finance will just be like, I don't know, I would just call it this. And you're like, that's brilliant. Like, that's great. I always did it I did it mostly for ad copy.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a good one. It's
yeah,
often overthought
yeah,
or over explained, and or it can be very simple, very simple.
right.
I heard this. I think it was from I believe MS Stratton. She is a messaging consultant for B2B tech companies, and I think she has this piece of advice that oftentimes non-native English speakers are the best at creating messaging because it's very clear and concise and
Yeah,
simplified. Um, and also, when you write something in English and it's translated to another language,
yep,
like the example you just said,
yeah,
it could mean something completely different. So if
yeah,
you're marketing to a global audience, it's something worth thinking about.
yeah. No, it's very. I don't know the veracity of whether it really meant we raised the dead, but it had connotations of
Just
like
run with that.
something along those lines. We bring good things to life had connotations that weren't
Uh,
right. It didn't feel right. But no, it's very true. It's very true, and I can see it with a non-native speaker. I actually work with one who does actually do a lot of messaging, and she, yeah, her messaging tends to be um, clear, concise, like doesn't doesn't play like punny games, doesn't mess around. It's just, and I love it because it's just like I my natural inclination would be to go for like the cute, to go for something clever,
yeah,
and there's a place for that, but there's a lot of room in the world for just like straightforward, um, you know, straightforward good messaging. The other thing I think about sometimes with messaging is just I try to compare it with other things in my life that I like and what I don't like. It's sort of like, how do I think about design? Like I tend to like uncomplicated, non-busy design, just a personal preference. And and then I'll look at things that have that attribute and see how they're performing. I'll use some tools to just see like are sites that are very complex in their layouts out overperforming or underperforming more straightforward layouts. Um, and you can learn a lot, and you can start to turn that into sort of like language. Like it's these things are all obviously they're very interrelated, right? Font matters, as much can matter as much as word. Um,
yeah,
Going back to our discussion about Jaguar, like that one font says one thing and the new font says something different.
yeah,
Same
definitely.
word. So I try to think about it kind of holistically too. At the end
Yeah,
of the day, like where is this going to be? Where is it going to appear? Where are people going to see it? What's it going to look like ultimately? And what's it also going to say? All of that matters. And where are they going to be when they're looking at it? So I think, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, the, the number one cardinal rule is always think like the person who's going to be buying.
yep.
And if you get that right, you got it.
Love this. On a more personal note, one of the questions we always ask is if you could put it into a single sentence, what is living all about?
Being useful enough to enough people so that you can be happy. I think
Love it.
that's
Love
I
it.
think that's what it's all about. Not saying I do it all the time. I think that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like useful enough,
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
yeah.
To wrap us off up, if listeners found what you shared valuable, where can they go to find you and help lift you up?
Oh man. If they want to find me, probably LinkedIn is the easiest place. If they want to find Open Road, they can find me that way too. But I would just search Open Road Media.
Yeah.
It's the easiest way. The URLs are long, um, and we're SEO'd, so like you'll find us.
Yeah.
So if they're curious about that, but if yeah, LinkedIn's a platform I really like to use. I don't mind DMs. In fact, I welcome them. So if people find things interesting or they want to ask a question, again, going back to what I just said about usefulness, I don't mind responding. I actually take satisfaction in it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Pete, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a blast.
Awesome.
So much insight, and thank you again. From your perspective as a CMO, this is really helpful and helpful for a lot of listeners. So I appreciate it.
That's great. Thanks so much for having me, Josh. I appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, everyone.
Take it easy.